call the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have a full committee, Mr. Weezer, Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Smith, Mr. Rosenthal, myself, Bernard Parks as chair. We can go through the agenda items, as first of all on consent items, if we can concur on items 10 and 12 for consent items.
Yeah.
That's good. Move.
Okay, we'll move items 10 and 12. On item 10, if we could ask the clerk, just for information, if we could work with the LAPD and add to the narrative of the report how many businesses that are in the city of LA that sell ammo, that we can have that in the narrative of the report. On item 12, okay. Also, we have items 1 through 8 are closed session items. We'll go in closed session. And also, everyone should be aware we have a special one on a briefing dealing with the pension system and this most recent New York case, which would be an open session. So if
I'm not going to vote yes on number 12. So
number 12, what is it?
12.
Oh, really? Was there an issue?
Is it issue?
Well, the issue is you're selling a piece of surplus property to a city employee for $1. And I'm just wondering if that's an appropriate thing to do. It's kind of like reserving it for city employee only, when there might be some other people who use that horse for better purposes at a regular auction. Or it could go to a nonprofit that works, I've got one in my district that works with autistic children and uses horses. And I think it may have better use than that. So I'm not so sure selling it to a city employee for $1 is the appropriate thing to do with that horse.
I mean, one of the things when I read this, the separation I made was we had one of these earlier this
Yeah.
month, and the fact that he's a former park ranger, I viewed him as no longer a city employee, so that was
But then you,
a stretch.
okay, again, then even it's worse, I think, probably, because now, now you're taking a city property, and I think we have a policy on that. You can't just give it to somebody for $1 unless they're a nonprofit.
Yeah. Or I think what is that? Lynn, why don't you come up? We amended that to include if it costs more to get rid of the property. I
Right.
think that was an amendment to the original.
This was through an amendment. The council amended the policy to say that if it costs the city more to dispose or transport for the disposal of a certain equipment item, that we could give it to anybody that was willing to take it off of our hands. So in this case, Rec and Parks, I believe, has said that it costs $500 a month to store and feed this horse, or stable and feed this horse. And we're running out of stable space because we've gotten younger horses to replace the horses. It was Rec and Parks' recommendation to sell the horse to Ms. Marks.
It says in the motion, the cost of maintaining the horse is approximately $500 per month, more than the city could receive through a market value sale.
That's what we're told by Rec and Parks. So the longer we keep the horse, the more money we
And that's,
spend.
yeah, that's about right, I think. But I wonder if they even tried doing a telephonic communication. Some people say, are you interested in the horse? Or
Do we have anyone here from Rec and Park? Okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we hold this till next meeting?
And
and it has
we'll
Rec and
ask Rec
Park?
and Parks what
Okay.
process they
And I'll
went
make
through.
some phone calls too. And Wendy, you've got some little groups like that in your district too.
The only thing that I second this because it was a, request from my colleague, but the only thing that says is that he was already acquainted with the horse. I don't know if this was a horse that he used a lot
Used,
or rode,
yeah.
that would
Which-
be an interesting
yeah.
point, because that would be a little bit.
And we do that
different.
with canine and
Yes.
police, so.
So that may be a different situation, if that was the only thing in reading it there.
Right, and we'll try to find that out before next week.
Okay.
But unless it's a private, unless it's a nonprofit, this is going to a private individual, which
Yeah.
does raise a question, what's that process to say, was this available to a lot of other people as well? So that's kind of, Rec and Parks can answer that as well. Yeah.
We'll find out.
Okay, so we'll hold that to the next meeting. All right, we have closed sessions item 1 through 8, and I have to recuse myself on number 1, so if you guys handle number 1, I'll be in after that.
We'll fix up after you.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay.
Parks, on the state budget, Maria Gutierrez of our staff.
This counts as stress, by the way.
Continuous. One thing, as you're giving your presentation, I understand last week, there's been some changes in our projection on revenue. Could you add that to your presentation also?
Actually, I cannot speak to that at this time.
Okay.
I would need to talk to our revenue group,
All right.
but we could provide additional update at a later time.
Okay.
Is it up or down?
It's down like 70 million.
Down revenue, no,
Yeah.
it wasn't good news.
Yeah. No, we told it was like 70 million. Okay.
Regarding the update on the state budget status, there are no significant changes to the state revenue sources. However, we are happy to report that there has been some positive activity on the bond sales. The state, as you may be aware, sold bonds on March 25th, and it was a very good reception at the bond market. This is good for us because if this continues, we are only hopeful that we will start getting our state bond funds from Proposition 1B, Proposition 12, and Proposition 40. Now, as far as the bonds that were sold on March 25th, we have received no indication that the city will be receiving any of those funds. They are being used to pay back different state loans. We do anticipate another state bond sale at the end of April, and we are hopeful that if everything works out, that we are hopeful that the city will receive some of those funds. But as far as we've been told by the state, there is no confirmation of when we will continue to see the Prop 1Bs, Prop 12, and $40 flowing back to the city. Informally, State Department of Rec and Park officials have indicated that possibly we could see the flow of Prop 12 and 40 bond funds sometime in midsummer.
Let me just ask, on March 25th, do we know how much in bond sales and what type of bond sales?
It's my understanding it was about $6.5 million that was sold in 2 days.
6.5
Initially, the
million.
plan was $4
Million or
billion.
billion?
Billion dollars.
Okay,
So the plan was initially $4 billion to be sold in 3 days,
okay.
but the reception was so successful that they ended up selling $6.5 billion in 2 days.
Shows P.T. Barnum was right. There is a sucker born every minute.
Now, do we know what type, I mean, do we know what type of bonds, in the sense of were they bonds for any specific 1B bonds or Prop 40?
These were actually state general obligation bonds, it's my understanding. Again, we are not aware that these are tied to state Prop 12 or Prop 40. Initially, the State Pooled Money Investment Board indicated that they would be releasing $500 million for public infrastructure projects. But we haven't been advised that any of this is coming to the city yet. And we'll just keep monitoring the market, and we'll be in touch with the state on these issues. But so far, there's no change.
Is there any change in the loss or the revenue that they've not sent us and that we're waiting for, that those might be broken loose, such as gas tax and other funds?
Right now, we have seen no change beyond what we were previously made aware of. As far as the gas tax, as we previously reported, there will be a delay, a 3-month delay in gas tax receipts. We are already seeing this. We did not receive our allocation for February and January. It was suspended through April, and based on what we've been advised, we expect to receive these monies in May. Of course, we're keeping an eye on how these state bond measures do. Those bond measures that are tied to the state budget. We will know more after the passage or whatever voters approve regarding these bonds. There are millions, as you know, tied to the budget and these bonds.
So what is our general perception, is nothing's going to move until the election?
As far as any changes to revenues that are coming from the state. We are not aware of any further reductions. We are keeping our eye close on the election in May, because as you know, there's, I believe, about $6 billion that is tied to these measures. So based on whatever happens, the state may make additional reductions. We don't know.
Do we get any idea that if these initiatives do not pass, what the alternatives might be, if they give any indication on that?
From what I've read, it's not good. I'm sure many options will be on the table. But as you may know, recently the State Legislative Analyst Office reported an additional $8 million hole in the state budget, and that was a recently adopted state budget. So if you take that $8 million plus another $6, you're putting a huge $14 billion hole in the state budget. So
It was eight more after they've come up with the 42. So they've now found another $8 billion hole.
yeah, there's $6 billion that is tied to the May 19th election. But in addition to that $6 billion, the state legislative analyst has indicated that revenues are down an additional $8 billion.
Zach?
I'm just curious, so January's money we didn't get, February money we didn't get. How much money was for January and February?
I'm not sure the exact allocations. I would need to get back to you on that, but we are waiting on approximately $33 million in gas tax funding. So it would be somewhere around that $33 million.
Is there any other monies being held up? Any other props and all?
The only funds that I am currently aware of is the gas tax that was deferred. There had been discussions of delaying Prop 42, but that didn't make it into the final budget bill. As far as the bond measures, propositions, Prop 12, 40, and 1B,
Right.
we're looking at a total of approximately $124 million that is on hold.
124 million.
That includes Prop 1B, Prop 12, Prop 40, and some Prop 50
And
funds.
are we able to make up that 124 million in our own mindsets at the moment, or when is it the rubber going to hit the road for us on that? Where things have to shut down and stop and all of that?
Well, I can't speak to the details of that, but I understand that there was a report issued recently
Yes, on
on
Prop
the
12 and Prop 40.
Prop 40 funds and a strategy for how that would be addressed on the short term and potential risks on the long term.
My hope is when it comes to this item, this is very important for us, for council, you give them that clarity, the total amount of money from this, that, and the other, where the likely timeframes might be, and what impact it might have on ongoing services. Because that's that ruling. That awareness we need to have.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Item number 11 on the agenda is a city attorney report, resolution declaring election results of special election and ordinance levying special taxes within City of Los Angeles Community Taxes District Number 2, Grand Avenue Project.
I'm Marilyn Garcia. I'm the Assistant City Attorney who's been drafting the community taxing documents. I'm available to answer questions.
Let me just ask, I think many of us were on that original Grand Avenue Task Force or whatever. I would just ask that for clarity, and so that when this report goes through, that there could be some information that gives some idea of the length of this tax is going to be in play. The other issue that is constantly misunderstood is that it's not money coming out of the general fund, it's money that's being basically made by the project, that they are creating a hotel which create taxes, which is now, we need that kind of explanation to so people that will understand that, as they like to label it, it's a giveaway project or things of that nature, that the project is actually creating the revenue, and if they don't create it, the city's general fund is not liable for it. So we need those kinds of explanation, what types of taxes are involved, explaining the apportionment of the taxes, so that there's a clarity and not just an approval of the vote, but that is some clarity as to what the taxes actually mean and the length of time and what type and how the general fund is impacted. So if we can get with the clerk as they prepare the report, we need that little brief history of what all this means in context with this vote.
May I explain where we're at on this and why this is just a brief document? Obviously, I will follow through with anything you want, but I would say 2 years ago is when the council and the county approved the business concepts involved with the Grand Avenue project, and there was a policy determination to provide, for lack of a better word, a subsidy to the project in the form of forbearing on the transient occupancy tax for about 20 years based on a formula, and the parking tax for about 10 years. And when the council voted on that, the city agreed to form a taxing district to implement those subsidies. So I've been working on the mechanics of getting a kind of a complicated taxing district formed to accomplish that policy result. And to do that, the developer has to vote to tax itself and create the subsidy. So this is the very, very last step of that.
All I'm asking is that they be an explanation as to the previous steps so that this won't be taken in isolation.
I see.
And be misinterpreted, because every time this project seems to come up, there is
Somebody
a
asked.
tremendous amount of misinterpretation, just as LA Live and others, as though the city's in a giveaway program, and there's not an understanding that these are very clearly established lines as to where the revenue comes from. It's generated by the project. If the project was not completed, you'd either have a vacant lot or some other non-tax producing element, and that's what we need, because 2 years ago, no one's going to go back and find the document that the city approved. They're only going to review this document out of context and say there's this voting issue, and all of a sudden we're back into the mode of where the money's coming from. And if we could explain it in this report as a backdrop, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, so I will prepare an overview chronologically.
Yeah, we don't have to be, telephone book size. We just
No.
need
I mean,
a
it'd be like
thumbnail to give an overview of this is the end of what the city voted on 2 years ago.
Right.
And here's what the city agreed to. So that you can
That would be quite possible to do, and it will,
That's all
give
I
a
would need.
chronological report.
And that way, when people get it as a public document, we don't, although there'll be some, but we will not have people not understanding that this is now a 3-year process, not just something that just got done this week.
Oh, that would be fine. When would you like this, and when would it be on the agenda?
The thing is, when will it be in the agenda?
We don't have a date at this point. As soon as I have the information, I'll be able to schedule it.
Okay, I should be able to have the report submitted to the clerk by the end of the week.
Okay. That way it helps all of us, and it's a document that can stand on its own.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is item 13, City Attorney Reports and Ordinances amending various sections of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to include emergency ambulance billing accounts among those eligible to be referred to the Department of Finance for collection. Perhaps if, before you start, if you could also maybe update the committee on the action that was taken this morning in Public Safety Committee on this item?
On what,
Right?
an update on what happened?
Was this discussed in Public Safety Committee this morning, and what was the resolution?
Carmen Hawkins with the City Attorney's Office. I guess this morning, this matter was taken up by the Public Safety Committee, where after discussion, basically, it was adopted and moved forward here. The only questions, there were requests for clarification with respect to, I guess, the dollar amounts of the emergency services uncollectibles that were sent over, and my recollection, actually, I want to let Fire restate what they said this morning.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Georgia Matera, Fire Administrator for the Fire Department. This morning in Public Safety Committee, we covered the ambulance billing proposal and the ordinances that were redrafted by the City Attorney's Office. Essentially, the ordinances will allow the uncollectible, those that were deemed uncollectible accounts that have been sitting on our books for a number of years to be sent and referred to collections. In addition to that, we also talked about those mandated adjustments that we've referenced before about getting those off the books. I have a letter that will be going to the Board of Review once the chief signs it, hopefully tomorrow, that will essentially eliminate $300 million of uncollectibles off of the city's books, which will leave us with maybe a total outstanding balance of around the range of $100 million. So it takes our uncollectibles down significantly.
You say uncollectibles, but those are the ones you said legally we can't collect.
That's correct.
So hopefully we word it that way, because when it's uncollectible, it takes a life of its own.
Yes.
But if they're legally prohibited from collecting, we need to label them as such so that people won't assume we just didn't do it.
Yes, sir. In fact, in what we've done in the ordinance is to allow the department to send those off as quickly as possible when we're mandated to adjust those amounts, so that as soon as they're not shown as a receivable on the city's CAFR, and they're just written off as a mandated adjustment and no longer will be shown as a liability on our books.
Very good. No, we need that, and when you do that first batch, which is going to be large, it is absolutely essential that the wording is proper so people understand it.
Yes, sir. We'll make sure that happens.
And where,
I was going to say, also what occurred this morning is there were previously two earlier drafts of the two ordinances, and those were just received and filed, and they adopted the new drafts that were submitted last week. And in those, both of those ordinances, what we addressed were the ambulance billing's unique situation from the other departments' uncollectibles, in that because of their requirements to not only go through billing the patient, but also pursuing Medi-Cal, Medicare, or private insurance, that in 22.210.2, instead of having the city's normal 30-day delinquency period, ambulance billings is given a 90-day delinquency before the time starts ticking for the referral over to either the Office of Finance or to the outside city collection agencies. They were also given in 5.181, rather than the 45-day referral period that the other departments must comply with, ambulance billings is given 9 months. And that was basically to allow them to go through the various processes that they have to go through in trying to collect these various debts before the referral, which otherwise, if they came over sooner and one of the outside collection agencies was to find out that this was actually, like, say, a Medi-Cal billing under the ordinance, they would be required to return that back to the fire department for handling. So this allows us to kind of have some definitive deadlines to move it along for processing, but allow fire the flexibility to do what they need to do. What we also added to 5.181 is that our collection expenses are now recoupable, so that rather than it coming out of the underlying debt that we collect, it's a recoverable cost now.
Let me just ask, you were at Public Safety this morning, any amendments to the ordinance at that
None.
committee? Okay. All right. And then let me ask you, on the ordinance, page 3, under J 1 through 6, do any of these items have a expiration date or a date of finality on them? Because we're saying things like, people are making a concerted effort, or do any of them have fall into any of your criteria?
Every one of them would be looked at on a case-by-case basis. For instance, on the person who's established a payment plan.
Yeah.
For instance, if that person fails to pay within that 45-day limit, then we would refer them to collections.
Okay, so this is all within the 45, this is not beyond?
In some cases, it just depends on the extenuating circumstances. For instance, on an automobile accident, it may take longer with the courts or with the attorneys, and so every one of them would be looked at and monitored. And once they reach a point where they haven't paid their bill and they've exceeded the dates, then those will automatically be referred. So it's a continuum. So we're always looking at it.
Unlike number 1, you'd have to have the payment plan in place before the 45-day delinquency, but it may take several months beyond that to pay it off.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that would be the case.
These are all situations where for one of those various reasons it wouldn't be appropriate to refer to a collection agency, because the mechanism is already there for a payment to be made, either on an ongoing basis or on a contingency basis when the recovery is obtained, for example, in a trial. And so if that were not to happen, then that would be the time at which it would be referred.
Okay. Let me ask the other thing. Could you explain, we talked earlier, the 3,000 to 5,000 threshold, and why it's not appropriate in this ordinance, but should be dealt with in another ordinance?
Yes, we felt that that request was made by Office of Finance to increase the amount for the referral to a collection agency from 3,000 to 5,000. And we felt that impacts, obviously, the people from whom we're collecting, but it also impacts the relationship with the collection agency that we have now. Those contracts were entered into with a particular expectation that files below a certain amount, there would be a certain number of files, and the possibility exists that the fees that were set were with that expectation of the amount of work and the number of files that they would get referred to them. So it merits, I think, more analysis than just us including it in the ordinance and saying, this sounds like a good idea, so we just threw it in anyway. It merits, we thought, a closer look and more information for you to consider before you make that decision.
Okay. So if I understand, you're saying we should wait, when the next RFPs, so that it's
just
consistent?
I'm sorry, all we suggested to Office of Finance is that they make that the subject of a separate report that would address the merits of doing that. And perhaps now, or perhaps at the time that a new RFP is done.
And it also dovetails into the Board of Review, where we ask
Not
them-
necessarily. The two are really independent of one of the other.
But we're talking about similar dollar amounts.
I'm sorry?
We're talking similar dollar amounts, because we asked them to evaluate.
Office of Finance is suggesting a similar amount for both, but it doesn't have to be the similar amount. They're really different propositions. What is referred to the Board of Review for their approval without any further action by council is different from what is referred to the collection agency for collection. It doesn't necessarily go together.
Mr. Parks, just to answer your question, it is our desire to have all of that uniform. I think the $5,000 level is the appropriate level, and I think we will go through whatever steps are necessary, but as soon as possible, we would like to establish that $5,000.
So you'll be coming back to us with some information about both issues?
Yes.
The Board of Review and the threshold?
Correct.
Okay. Let me ask the fire department, now that I understand you have the new handheld equipment for billing, or that's in process?
It's still in the process.
Okay. And now we have, if we start the review of moving these forward, how does that impact your personnel resources? I know you're going to, what the answer is, but I have to ask, do you need less people now that you have these new systems? More of the workload is moving elsewhere? Have they evaluated that?
Actually, yes, we're in the process of finalizing that. What will eventually happen when this comes online is that we will have the field data capture system that will allow us to electronically capture the patient information instead of the handheld or the manual written forms right now. That data will automatically be transmitted directly to our ambulance billing unit as well as to the hospital. When that happens, that data entry component of the people actually having to sit and input that data is no longer needed. So eventually, we'll get to the point where when that comes online and we have our billing vendor, that there will be less of a need for that type of work.
And when will that occur? Idea?
We are in the process of finalizing the contracts with the city attorney, and we are meeting with them on a weekly basis. As soon as those contracts are ready to go, we've done the cost analysis, and then the board report is ready to go, and we will submit that to our board. We're hoping we'll have that within the next couple months.
Now, is that contract for purchase, RFP, or?
It is actually to enter into contract for both the field data capture component as well as the billing. So there will be two contracts that will come through to the council.
Well, that was my question, because as you look, the 2003 motion was when we had the audit and then the bearing point study, and so we've been talking about this for a really long time.
Yes.
So is this actually going to happen? Greg and I were saying it never or in our lifetime, or?
It's getting close. I was in the CAO's office at the time when we started working on this many years ago, and we're still working on this. This is, as you know, a very complicated project, and it has many tentacles. And so we have we met with the CAO's office to talk about some of the potential employee relations issues. We're meeting with city attorney on the contracts, and we'd be happy to sit with you and give you a more up-to-date briefing if you'd like to go through that. Or
I think what we really want is a timeline, because this is not, I mean, again, I think you guys have heard me say this before, that I went out on a run one time with the fire department and paramedics. And the fact that we use triplicate is just, bad service all around. And so it needs to happen. So I guess mine is too, with the city attorney's office and fire department, is really a clear timeline as to when this is going to be implemented, because it is both cost savings, it's more effective, provides better service to the people who, when you go to the hospital, instead of having to read something at hot sinks, all the things that make it. So if you could provide to my staff literally where we are and where there are problems and why it's not happening, then we need to move on that.
I'd be happy to do that.
Most health plans, do they cover the service, whether it's the basic life support or the advanced life support fee? Most of them do cover it.
Most of them do, through insurance, do cover that, and they will not cover the full amount typically. There is a deductible that usually has to be met, and then any part that is not met by the insurance carrier is then billed to the
So
patient.
we're looking at the deductible, but once you take out that population of people, what, are we speaking mostly of low-income people?
Mm-hmm.
But then we have an exemption for them,
Yes.
correct? So what are the characteristics, or what generally are the type of people we're dealing with who are not paying and we would need to go collections? Have we determined that?
Well, typically what we've done is we've gone through and we've taken a sample of how much we bill and how much we recover after the mandated adjustments, and then what's left over, and how much we follow up on. So what's left over roughly is in the range of around $25 million typically. And within that $25 million, we've broken that down to come up with the types of cases. Now, a significant percentage, about 13 million of that 25, are undeliverable, mail that's undeliverable, people we can't track back, and we're hoping that with this field data capture system that we'd be able to get more accurate patient information and be able to bill the patient more efficiently, as well as using a vendor to do a number of the skip tracing, going back, finding these people, tracing them back to where they live and getting them the bill as quickly as possible, so because some people move and leave their former place of residence. So that's a significant portion. Many of those people within that $25 million demographic are low income. And so some of those folks we're not going to be able to collect from regardless, because they meet the low income guidelines.
Which leads to my next question. I assume that was a group of people we're dealing with. How do these people know that they would qualify to be exempt from this service? or in other words, what if our collection agency, whoever we select, goes after them and doesn't notify them that they are eligible to be exempt? Now, there's a poor person, poor grandma who slipped and fell on a sidewalk, got some ambulance service, and now we're bugging her that she needs us, and she's trying to determine whether she's going to pay her bill, her electrical bill, or pay this collection. Now, how do they know, and what are we going to do to ensure low-income people that they can be exempt from this?
Yeah, very good question. In fact, what we've done is on the bill itself, is we notify them that if they fall below the DWP set threshold, that we will give them assistance to give us a call. And so usually what they'll do is they'll contact us through the phone number, and we give them the guidelines, and then they can go ahead and make contact with us, and we can set something up, or we can help them file the exemption.
And that's done even before we go to collections,
Yes.
right? So it's at both levels, and whoever we work with are going to be very clear on our guidelines that people could be exempt, and that they should say big and in simple letter ways you qualify. Now, do we also use other languages other than English?
We do have Spanish, and I believe we also have some, I'm not sure if we have Korean, I'd have to check. But I
So
know.
someone who we start collections from, they would know in a language other than English that they could be exempt and qualify
Yes.
for low
We
income.
make sure we reach out to as many people as we can. In addition to that, one of the concerns also is HIPAA, with the new regulations coming down from the feds mandating privacy on these accounts.
Yeah.
That's going to be an area we'll be working closely with Office of Finance and the prospective collection agencies on those privacy issues as well.
But I suspect, it sounds like you're already doing that, but I would ask again, when you work with these collections agencies, whether it's in the RFP or whatever it is, that they send information out very clear and simple, bold, et cetera, in languages other than English, that they could qualify to be exempt if they're low income. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just, it's a beautiful day. I appreciate what we're hearing here. So when we look at that 140 million, the Office of Finance is going to vigorously attack that thing from various angles. Do you have enough pros on the staff that understand the Medicare and the Medicaid and the this and the that and the other groups that need to be understood, who are really holding up that money, right? For the most part?
In terms of
Insurance companies,
Oh, yes.
Medicare. I mean, the 140 million, if you were to do a breakdown for us, what would be the breakdown for
the breakdown of the 140 million that's outstanding.
Yeah.
Well, as we talked about, some of it is old stuff that just needs to come off the books, old accounts. So
How
we're
much would
cleaning
you
those-
say is
cleaning those
that?
folks out? Right now, we have probably about 50 million worth, if not a
50
little bit
million
more.
out of the 140?
Right.
Okay, so then we'll clean that off, we won't carry that anymore, we won't be burdened with that propaganda notion. We're down to 90 million?
Yes.
Okay, take me through the 90 real quick.
Now, the 90 is broken down into those issues that I was just mentioning to
Yeah.
Councilmember Huizar on the folks that, some people are going to be just undeliverable mail, people we cannot find or trace back to.
Right.
And so we acknowledge that we're going to have to try to track those folks. Some people have unfortunately passed away, some people are in jail, they're incarcerated,
Yeah.
those folks are going to have to be taken off the books. We're going to be looking
The
to...
deceased, and even those in jail, why would we have to take them off when it might have been their insurance company that should have paid for it, or Medicare, or Medicaid, or something else should have paid for it?
Well, typically what will happen is we'll accept whatever the insurance company will give us if they did die subsequent to their transport. And so we will take that off, and then if we're required to write off anything beyond that, then we'll have to cite that as a mandated adjustment. And so what we're trying to do is clean off as many people as we can off the books. Our hope is that when we get this new billing vendor online, that company is very proficient in the coding of these types of incidents. So they'll help us in the areas where if they code accurately, then we'll be able to get as much reimbursement back from the feds or from the state in terms of coding errors that maybe we're committing simply because we're not professionals in the field.
Yeah. Now, will you have to augment your staff at all, or do you have enough personnel to play this out?
We anticipate that if this contract is accepted by the City Council and the Mayor's office, that we should have enough staff with their resources to do what needs to be done.
And what would be your time frame of where this 90 million might end up in our pockets?
Well, we don't know if it would be the full 90 million that you'll see. You may see some portion of it, and I couldn't tell you how much offhand. But our hope is that, our key is really to get the contracts on board, which we hope to do within the next couple months, and I know it's been a long time coming.
Sure.
And we're all anxious for that. And once we do that, we're hoping by the end of this calendar year, we'll have everything in place, ready to start January 1st is really our target.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move, basically, with no recommendation from Public Safety, we'll support their report on Budget and Finance. We'll also receive and file the City Attorney's reports April 3rd and March 5th. We'll approve the draft ordinance dated April 1st, and we'll ask or instruct the Office of Finance to report back on increasing the threshold for referrals and collections from 3,000 to 5,000, and also including the potential number of accounts that may be affected, the impact on city workload staff, impact on the amount of revenue collected, impact on the fee structure with collection contractors. And also, I'd like to add a fourth one that we asked for a report back for the CAO and LA Fire Department, that upon the implementation of the electronic field data capture in the billing system, that they do an evaluation on the workload and personnel resources and make recommendations. So we'll move that item, 13.
Okay. Item number 14 on the agenda is a motion, Park Smith, relative to an agreement between the City of Los Angeles and the State Franchise Tax Board for the reciprocal exchange of limited business taxpayer information.
Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance.
Yeah. Let me just ask a couple of quick questions. One of the things I didn't quite understand is in the report it shows that with us doing this, the city's going to save anywhere from $165,000 to $495,000. Where is that savings coming from, and where do those funds go?
Currently, the AB 63 program costs the city approximately $185,000 per year to obtain the data on a twice-a-year basis. As a result of Senate Bill 1146, which was passed in September of 2008, the Franchise Tax Board had authority to extend the AB 63 program for an additional 5 years through the end of the 2013 calendar year. The implementation of SB 1146 by FTB was presented to Office of Finance that we would only receive data on a once-a-year basis, and that would be in December of each calendar year. As a result, we entered into a negotiation with the Franchise Tax Board to ensure that we continue to receive the data on a twice-a-year basis, both in June and December. As a result of this negotiation, the extra data exchange would cost the city $20,000 per year. Currently, given the fact that we're paying up to $185,000, we would realize a cost savings on an annual basis of $165,000.
Okay, so we're paying this now with the new law. It would have been no cost at all, except that we asked for the twice a year.
Correct.
Now it's going to cost us 20.
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me just ask one other question. Is that with all of this, with the new law, there is no cost to the state for us providing them the annual information?
That's correct. As written, the SB 1146 mandates that both the state and the city cover their own costs. If we were able to accept the information on a once-a-year basis, you're correct, there would be no cost to the city. Unfortunately, in order to maintain a consistent and efficient flow of tax revenue through the AB 63 program, it does require that our office receive the information on a twice-a-year basis, so that would result in the $20,000 cost to the city.
Okay. And then one of the things, the last thing I wanted to know is that why did we negotiate a timeline that's shorter than the legislation?
The Franchise Tax Board would only enter into a 3-year agreement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move that item. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And if I could respectfully request that, given that the normal data exchange is June of this year, and that the Franchise Tax Board requires payment in May, that if the motion could move to the full council as soon as possible.
How quickly can we? Tuesday. How's that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Move that item for Tuesday.
We have one item on the special agenda, item number 15.
Excuse me, I mean Tuesday next week.
Sir?
Tuesday of next week.
Next week, not tomorrow.
Next week.
Tuesday next week, not tomorrow. Okay.
Item number 15 is a discussion of Securities and Exchange Commission complaint and New York Attorney General criminal charges involving the New York State Common Retirement Fund and any impact on the LA Fire and Police Pension Fund or the LA City Employees Retirement Fund.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Laura Guglielmo from LA Fire and Police Pension Fund, and with me is Tom Lopez, our Chief Investment Officer, and Mike Wilkinson, our City Attorney that represents LA Fire and Police as well as Lacers. And Sally, do you want to introduce yourself?
And Sally Choi with Lacers, and I'm here with Investment Officer Wayne Ige.
And I wanted to, our General Manager, Michael Perez, asked us to send his regrets. Unfortunately, he is in the hospital and is not able to be here today. So we will be covering.
How is he?
He's okay. He's expected to recover, but he's...
Get the material.
We certainly will.
The material.
Just to give you a brief overview, on March 19th, 2009, the Securities and Exchange Commission filed a civil complaint, and the Attorney General of New York filed a criminal indictment against two individuals associated with the New York State Common Retirement Fund. Henry Morris, a political consultant and fundraiser for the former Comptroller of New York, and David Logiski, the former Chief Investment Officer of the New York State Common Retirement Fund. For that fund, the State Comptroller is the sole trustee. And the complaints allege that the Chief Investment Officer and Mr. Morris set up a kickback scheme to require payments in return for contracts with private equity firms and hedge funds seeking to manage investment assets held by the New York State Common Retirement Fund. These payments were allegedly covered as placement fees and paid to Morris. The funds deny knowledge that the fees were not legal placement fees. Although not charged with any wrongdoing, our private equity advisor, Aldous, was named in both legal actions. Also mentioned but not charged was Pacific Corporate Group, or PCG. The founders of our other private equity advisor, Stepstone, were the senior executives in PCG's private equity group during much of the time of the identified in the complaints. Staff reported these allegations to our Fire and Police Pension Board on April 2nd, and both Aldous and Stepstone came before the board and denied any involvement. Staff also sent both Aldous and Stepstone a detailed questionnaire to obtain additional information. We are closely monitoring this situation and will continue to do so, and we'll report back to our board as more information is available. I don't know if Sally has any additional questions, but we're happy to answer questions.
As for Lacers, of the 20 investment managers that were named in the case, we have relationships with several of the managers, although none of them have been charged with any wrongdoing. We only have one investment in common with the New York Common Retirement Fund. So at this point, there's been no impact on our portfolio or any impact on the managers that manage our private equity funds. So we're monitoring this very closely, and we'll continue to look at our own processes to ensure something like this doesn't happen within our own fund.
With what's going on in New York, how would that, is there any connection or how it would impact our association with these individuals or these funds?
At this point, we haven't identified if there's any connection or any negative impact to our funds. I think the fact that there's some of the general partners that were named that were involved in the different investments, that does cause us concern to look at, you know, what kind of exposure it could bring to us. But at this point, there's nothing that's been identified. However, I think Fire and Police has a different issue with respect to the consultants that were involved.
Let me ask before we go to that, is that could they, in the sense of what's going on in New York, have a similar kickback scheme in working with our pension funds?
That potential is always there. However, I think we have
very good due diligence processes in our system at the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System to ensure that there aren't any such schemes. So there's also a lot of transparency, and everything is done, all the investment decisions are done through public meetings, so all of that is fully disclosed. So as far as we know, there shouldn't be any impact to us.
Is it of greater concern that the equity advisors or the general partners are mentioned?
Right.
Which
So
one is one more serious than the other?
is one more serious than the others? I think maybe the city attorney can address that, but at this point, because there isn't any wrongdoing that's been alleged of these managers, it's really hard for us to see. I think we have to wait to see what unfolds as this case proceeds.
And you said that the fire and police may have a different concern?
I'm Tom Lopez, the Chief Investment Officer at the Los Angeles Fire and Police. There would be a difference in terms of degree between an individual private equity fund allegedly paying a bribe to get business versus someone who's actually controlling the entire private equity program. And so our connection to the scandal is greater than Lacer's, because the two consultants that run the board's private equity program have some sort of connection to this criminal indictment.
The connection is that their names are mentioned, or they are unindicted co-conspirators, or?
No one besides the chief investment officer and the political consultant have actually been charged with any wrongdoing. It's just those two individuals. So despite the fact that there are many firms involved in what appear to have been paying bribes, there have been no charges brought against any of them. And in past cases like this, it's usually unusual for them to go after the people who are paying the bribes.
What would be I guess a plan of action other than monitoring if you find wrongdoing? Is that some legal action against the individuals or the fund if you find out that they are then charged criminally, or what would be?
Well, we have no evidence at this point of anything going wrong at our systems. It's just that there are these connections. Mm-hmm. Some of the private equity investments that our plan and Lacer's has made are actually named in the complaints as people who were alleged to have paid fees to get business from the state of New York. And then in our case, the board has hired 2 private equity advisors to manage our investment program within that asset class. All this is mentioned in both of the legal actions as an entity that had been paying money to the 2 allegedly corrupt individuals. In the other case of Stepstone, it's sort of one step removed. It's the firm that founders of Stepstone used to be employed at that is actually mentioned in the complaints.
So why that's a concern, the fact that the consultants are involved, is because these are the folks that are our gatekeepers. These are the folks that advise the board on what investments to make and do the due diligence. So you're relying on their expertise, and so that's where the challenges or the concern might be.
Would any of these issues of the fund managers or advisors, are they in any way associated with any of the city's pending lawsuits dealing with our insurance and bond sales in other areas?
Not that I know of, no.
Pete's shaking his head in the back, too. I said Pete's shaking his head in the back, too.
Pete, shake your head again. Which way did you? No? Okay. Yeah.
No, but clearly, I mean, this is, you'll keep us abreast of what's happening in the state.
Just to jump in very quickly, the city attorney's office, we're following this thing very closely, so it's not something that's escaped our attention at all.
Great.
So when we say monitoring, I mean, have we created any type of internal investigation to monitor any contact that we've had with these individuals, or we just, nothing has? So there's 2 ways of looking at this. Have we proactively investigated, or have we said nothing really pops up out of the ordinary?
We formally asked the city attorney to take a look at the allegations and see if there was any action that might be appropriate for them to take. Internally at the staff level, we brought it to the board's attention, and we asked their permission to ask both of the advisors some questions specifically about their involvement in this case.
And in addition, Rocky Delgadillo has spoken directly to California Attorney General Jerry Brown, and there's been no commitment there, but it has been passed on, and he said that he would get back to us on that.
Okay. And finally, anything, in terms of performance, anything that these individuals touched or were involved with here in Los Angeles, was there anything out of the ordinary in terms of performance? It's hard to say, given the ups and downs of the last few months. But
Well, all of the investments that are concerned with our two funds here are what is known as private equity investments. So these are pools of institutional money that have been aggregated together. And rather than investing in things that are traded on the stock market or the bond market, they will go out and they invest directly in individual companies, hence the private and the private equity thing. These are very long-lived funds. A typical lifespan is 10+ years. And so essentially the only time you really know how well you did at that is at the end of that time period. You can take some interim peaks, so to speak, but for all of this type of investment category, the first 3 to 5 years you would expect to see a decline in assets. You'd expect to see losing money. And the term is referred to as the J curve, where you put the money in and then your money starts shrinking in terms of value. And if the fund is successful, then it takes off at the other end. But all of these are with funds that are, by our standard, relatively new. So there is no performance available that's meaningful. I mean, all of them have actually, declined in value, but that's what we would expect for this type of investment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. What we'll do is hold this in committee and ask for a report back in 30 days to keep us abreast of what's going on. Thank you.
That would conclude our agendas.
And Dion, you were right. We didn't have to go in closed session. Okay, is that it?
There's a comment.
Okay, we have one public comment, Ms. Joan Taylor.
Ms. Joan Taylor, Taylor Joan.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm Joan Taylor, and I apologize that some of you and the council may have to hear my proposal more than once. I'm presenting it to 3 commissions and 4 council committees because I would like a consensus of the council because it concerns dismissal or change in 65 union jobs, drivers, van drivers. The proposal has been reviewed by Laura Chick, and her letter to me is the 5th page here, and she has sent the proposal to the Department of Aging General Manager with the request she reply to me. The help of the Budget Committee could be decisive. As you know, we're facing a $450 million deficit in the city. And this program is called Door-to-Door Transportation Program under the Department of Aging. It consists of 65 vans, 4 for each of your council districts. 2 of these vans, and incidentally, you bought these vans for several $1 million. I'm out of breath from walking back. You bought these vans for several $1 million. You insure them every year. You pay for drivers for them. You gas them. You oil them. You garage them. You have all of this expense, and they're only used 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. It's a completely uneconomic situation. 2 of those vans in each district are used as taxis for seniors and disabled, and they claim a door-to-door service. Essentially, they only service 6 riders a day. They go to the door and get them and bring them out to the van and back. Again, it's uneconomic. The other 2 vans are used by the sponsoring agency, and while I appreciate the very fine tax-exempt efforts of many of these agencies, it's hard to justify vans. I live near a senior center. I have seen these vans sit there for 2 hours, and I've seen the driver being paid for 2 hours of nothing, unless you teach them needlepoint and sell it as a craft. It's uneconomic again. Now, I suggest that you get rid of these vans and the drivers, absorb them into other jobs when you can, because 30 of them are long-term employees. The others are entry jobs. But go to this transportation program, extend it, and allow the Department of Aging to sell us as many as 2 books for each senior and disabled, and now is able to get the transportation. This is the cheapest way, the most efficient way, the best way. Don't waste your time with those vans, and please get a consensus of the council so that the blame does not fall on Tom LaBonge, because he chairs the committee for the Department of Aging. Thank you for your time.
We have no more comment cards, and the meeting's adjourned.
Wait a minute, meeting Thursday?
Yeah, on Thursday, everybody's consensus, 10 o'clock?
Oh, 10 o'clock, but there was some concern by the
Yeah.
CPA.
Yeah, 10, and there's one item dealing with the con plan, 10 o'clock, and I think we'd be through with it in an hour, hour and a half at max. Okay? Great. So that's the special meetings.
Is there anything possible about our
budget
constituents
finance,
that
special
we
budget
could refer our stuff to the CLA to just take a look at it? Or a suggestion about those vans?
It should be LADOT. I think we've given it to LADOT, right? The it's come through transportation, and we've
I think
given
it's
it.
going to come to Transportation Committee, too. We'll make sure.
Okay, because it's worth looking at.
Yeah, but I think